the Blue Watch, your backstage pass to the lives of frontline officers and the leadership steering the way. I'm Chris Casto. Joining us today is Lance Arnold. Lance has had a long career, including being a SWAT team commander, captain in Norman, Oklahoma, and now a dual role, not only as the chief of police, but assistant city manager in Weatherford, Texas. Lance, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you, Chris. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, really appreciate it. So tell me about this dual role. I'm really interested. How hard is it kind of balancing both assistant city manager and chief of police?
Well, it's certainly not something I think I set out to do. And one of the things when I get this question is really kind of as an icebreaker too. I tell people, I had the unfortunate distinction of my first year serving in the role of submitting my budget as a department director as the police chief, and then rejecting my budget as the assistant city manager. So it's not my best moment for sure, but
Hold on a second.
um,
I got to ask this. So wait, so you submitted your own budget for the year, but then you had
I
to
did.
reject it right afterwards?
I did, and part of that is really kind of what is great about the role too was I kind of equate it to when everyone in our field typically starts out in patrol, right? And when they the first time they take that assignment outside of patrol, all of a sudden this entire world of policing that they were maybe completely unfamiliar with, all of a sudden it becomes wide open, to them. And it's really that way in that assistant city manager role. It's something that you get this really much larger perspective of the entire city. And frankly, in that particular instance, it was really seeing the needs across the other departments, and really weighing them against the things that we were asking for. We're extremely fortunate in Weatherford to have the support of our public, the support of our city administration, our city council, and mayor. And so, we have a lot of great resources and things going for us. So that was really kind of how that worked out. But the way it really kind of started is the city manager asked me to consider becoming the director of public safety, and that's something that really is becoming more and more common in our world. Just because, as you well know, public safety, all aspects of public safety are so intertwined nowadays. It's hard when you look at some of these larger scale events, planned or unplanned, that you don't have to have really that marriage of all of your public safety elements together. And so when I started, I really was just still serving as the police chief, but took over that public safety director role over fire and emergency management. And then I think I didn't screw that up too bad. That there was a need for I'm kind of known as a fixer, and I have been my whole career. And not that these departments necessarily needed fixing, but they certainly needed some attention. And the city manager asked me to step into the assistant city manager role, and I took on human resources and development neighborhood services, which most cities would call planning and development. But the reality of it is that on a lot of days it does seem like I'm on this never-ending hamster wheel. And then I would, say that what I have to be very careful and very intentional about is, where I place my attention and my energy and my presence. I think all of those are really, really important. And as an example, we did a climate survey. It was really important to me towards the end of the year, and one of the things that came out of that climate survey was just our own staff at the police department saying, "Hey, we don't get to see you very often. You're being pulled in a lot of different directions, and quite frankly, we don't think it's fair." And I shared that with my city manager, but it really was a wake up call for me to be very intentional and purposeful about the time that I spend, where I spend that energy, and more than anything, it wasn't that I still have a chance every day to interact with every one of our staff members, but what it does mean is they know when I'm in the building and when I'm not in the building, and it makes me feel good too that they want me to be in the building.
Yeah, and in those two roles, do you ever come across situations where, I mean, you mentioned already the having to do the budget. Do you ever cross any other situations where the decision on one role negatively affects the other, and how do you balance that?
That's a great question, and honestly, not so much here. I think because we have so much support, but back to that point of really that bigger perspective. And so I think what it does is I do have to temper the passion of our staff. We have a passionate, innovative staff that's looking to do more and more and more. And at the same time, I have to kind of temper some of that passion with things that I know that are more pressing in the city. And so that's probably not so much conflict, but maybe a better understanding of kind of how we play nice with all of the other departments. It's easy for police chiefs, fire chiefs to always kind of wave that flag of life safety and public safety is the most important thing, and certainly it is. But now I have this perspective of public safety also impacts our public works department in the roadways, in our utility service. This time of year, especially in Texas, if they don't have power, if they don't have water, those are public safety issues. And so really, it's given this perspective of how do we balance all of these needs that we have throughout the city, really to drive that bigger city mission that the police department mission is very much in support of as well.
It's something that I found in my career because I've been in law enforcement for just over 17 years. I've advanced through a few different ranks. I'm up to lieutenant now, so we'll see where it comes from that. But as you go up, I found like you're now like, okay, you're not the guy kicking in the door. Now you're the guy watching and helping those guys kick in the door. Then you move up a little bit. Now you're the guy kind of like making sure you get the training ready for everybody to be ready to kick in the door. So now,
Right.
like you move up to police chief, you're over the whole department. As assistant city manager, you're actually looking at multiple departments, not just, police, but you're looking at, like you said, fire, EMS, various different, things. So that 30,000-foot view it completely expands.
It absolutely does. And to your point, I tell, new commanders and new lieutenants that come into the role, back to your point about the door kicker versus the person that's making sure they've got the training and the resources and the support and all those things that they need. Chris, and you may be the same way. I found it harder to be in that higher role than I did being the number one guy going through the door.
Oh,
Quite frankly,
I want to be breaching. I'm with you. I want to be like at
yeah,
the door.
because I have more concern over them and what they're doing, and I have all the trust in the world with them. But at the same time, I get more stressed worrying about them than I did if it was just myself, leading the way or whatever. And so, but to that point, I think it's really that big picture view and knowing, one of the things I tell people too is, and this isn't, I clearly have a passion and love for policing and know exactly kind of where it stands in my pecking order. But one of the examples that I give is that when you look at it, and most police agencies belong to a larger organization, whether it be county government, city government, state government, or the feds. And so when you think about it, when you ask a police officer where they work, if you ask one of my officers, they're clearly going to say the Weatherford Police Department. If you ask a firefighter, they're going to say the Weatherford Fire Department. But if you ask somebody that picks up our solid waste, or somebody that's working on the street crews or anything like that, they're probably going to say City of Weatherford. I work for the City of Weatherford, and they're going to say that with pride. And so part of that big picture perspective is also getting our own staff to realize, hey, we're a team, and we're a solid team, but we're also part of a much bigger team too. And that helps in so many ways when it comes from special event planning to unplanned, the biggest scale events that we have. It just makes that mesh so much easier when we think about this. We're part of this much bigger system, if you will, and that's part of the thing that I think serving in that dual role keeps me very grounded in that we're not the only department. It's like I gave that example from that first time you step out of patrol and you realize, oh, well, there's all these other things, and so but you're still part of that team. And I think it really helps ground all of us to that.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting point. The thought of like how we say, yeah, Austin Police or Weatherford Police, yeah, that's where we work. But in reality, we work for the city government, the actual city government. So
Right.
if you look at it for like a team perspective, I think that actually is really cool. The way that you put it is because you can take that and you can build it into a philosophy for your department that we all not represent the police department, but we represent the city, and it kind of builds a bigger team mentality.
If you think about it too, I mean, we are typically in policing the most visible and upfront part representative of that larger city government, even. And we always say, I mean, the way policing has changed is that we are really that only agency 24/7, regardless of what the emergency that citizen is experiencing, whether it be a line break or a prowler or a burglar or whatever it may be. It doesn't, we respond to all of it. and you know that. And so I think it really is part of that bigger picture of this entire system working together.
One of those things in I've noticed that you posted a few times is talks about this concept of being a positive disruptor. Now I've heard that phrase a few different places, and different articles about positive disruption. What does that mean to you, being a positive disruptor?
Yeah, well, really, it's just about challenging conventional thinking, challenging the norms that we may have, the systems and the processes that we use that sometimes we don't even question. It's really about challenging those and to do so in a way that fosters that innovation, that fosters continuous improvement and progress. It's about questioning traditional methods, embracing new ideas and perspectives, and really kind of initiating those, I would say, transformative changes in organizations. We know, and I love the phrase, kind of that VUCA environment, which is that VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And we operate in that day in and day out. And our organizations have to be agile. They have to be responsive to all of those things, the environment going on around us. And you know as well as I do, first and foremost, government historically is not that agile or responsive. And then the police departments themselves. I mean, we've been forced to be more of that lately, but not always, right? We still have a lot of those traditional thinking that goes on inside of our organizations. And so, really, and a funny story about the positive disruption. So, I had an opportunity to go, again, part of that outside the box was I looked for training and experiences that are outside of the traditional law enforcement command type experiences. And so, very blessed and fortunate that my city allowed me to go to Gallup in Omaha, Nebraska, and I went to the Gallup Global Strengths Coach course. And first and foremost, learned a lot about myself, but also learned about how the differences between coaching and mentoring. And when I was there, I met a group that were like, "Hey, you got to have a leadership brand." And here I am. I mean, I'm just a police chief. I'm like, what do you mean a leadership brand? I mean, the title kind of says what it is, right? And they're like, "No, you got to have a brand." And so I thought about that, and I started looking through kind of what are my top strengths and talents, and how have I used those historically, and so you mentioned that you'd read it in other articles and stuff, and I had never actually seen the term, and so I come up and I'm like, you know what, I'm a positive disruptor, so proud of myself, and then I look on the internet and I'm like, oh man, people have been
It
using this for a while
it's
now,
taken.
so I know. But it really does outline, I think, I think back even in my history, my career, if you're anywhere like that, or if our listeners have had these experiences where, even at an early age in my career, I was still kind of doing that, challenging the status quo, challenging the way that we did things. Now you can imagine, in my first few years, that didn't get me a lot of places. So I had to find ways to kind of maybe a different approach to some of those things, but I always stayed really true to that aspect of what I bring, and I think the value that I bring as a leader.
Yeah, and in looking ahead, you mentioned that you have to be innovative whenever you're doing this positive disruption. You have to look forward. Looking forward 5, 10, 20 years, what do you see policing as? And do you see it continuing this like we have in the last 5 years, this innovative kind of moving forward culturally?
You could probably spend multiple shows with people talking about the future of policing, right? Just think about, you said 17 years in your career and 27 in mine, and think about the last 5 years is a great kind of snapshot of the pace at which changes have occurred. And is it going to continue at this kind of blistering pace? And I don't know, but one of the things that I see is certainly a rise in kind of non-professional staff, non-sworn professional staff, really taking more of the traditional roles of policing. I definitely see a lot of talent out there for people that may not want to go through the academy and go start their career in patrol and do all that, but they bring an incredible amount of skill to an organization in the areas of digital forensics, or even forensics itself. We're starting to see a lot of, most of your forensic staff are probably professional staff, non-sworn, and so, but I see that, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are utilizing civilians right now in investigative roles.
Yep.
We're
Civilian
using them.
investigators or even social workers on patrol calls to help out with the patrol officers.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't diminish the role of the police. In fact, it supplements and supports, in my opinion, the role of the police. And then, I think the other thing that you're seeing a lot of right now and a really big push is really everything that we do being data driven and evidence based, right? And that's not saying that we want quantity more than quality, but are we making good decisions based on the data? Are we doing things that are right for our specific communities based on the data and based on the evidence? Are we pilot testing, programs? Are we evaluating programs? That's the other thing that I see. And one of the things that really helped me as an assistant city manager is I would see these other departments say, budget requests. We want to do this new program. We want to do this new program, but yet we're not evaluating our past programs or the existing programs. We're just adding. And so, I brought that back to the police department. Like before we start asking for more to do more, let's evaluate what we're doing now. And then let's look at the evidence and what return on our investment, what return on the citizens' investment are we getting for this work and this effort and the resources that we have. And so I definitely think that's a big one. Just personally, I think we're going to see some major advances in personal protection equipment. I think at some point, this in our lives, we're going to see ballistic protection woven into our uniforms themselves. We're certainly
God, I
going to
hope
see
so. That
more.
thing is so dang heavy. I was at a soccer game just last night. It is hot as Hades outside, and you're wearing an easy bake oven. I mean, I
Yeah,
really hope that gets lighter.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And even force officers, we see nowadays. I think part of it's become such a huge topic. And I think the more that it garners that attention, I think the value in some of that attention, not only in the way that we evaluate maybe our practices, but we evaluate what resources do we have available to us to create positive outcomes. And I think the more that you get scientists, innovators, tech people involved in those things, right now you've got Axon has announced their moonshot and what they're moving at this blistering pace of trying to create a lot of these things, and they're not going to be the only company that does so. And so I think that's going to be a big one. One of the things I'm curious about too as we move on is, as we grow, we know that the vast majority of police agencies in this country are made up of officers, 10 or less officers, 5 or less officers. And it really becomes kind of the haves and the have-nots. You look at the resources where you work, and even the resources. I tell people that even in our agency that is considerably smaller than Austin, still operates more like in Austin with just less people, but more of the same type of resources and tools and things available to us than an agency that may be 10 or 15 or 20 officers. And so, is there going to start to be this idea of regionalization, consolidation, and with that, what are going to be those challenges with are those departments, moving in that direction? Are they still representative of the people they serve, ideology wise and the things? Because at the end of the day, those people are the ones that tell us how they want, the police to operate. And so, and the other thing that I'm hearing a lot of discussion about is this idea of kind of a national command college. We have a lot of these national leadership programs that are flagship type programs, but they really miss the mark, I think, in preparing the leaders for tomorrow. They're great for a lot of things, and I don't, bemoan any of them for what they add to our skill set and all of that. But when you look at UK and some of these other places, you know, before someone can achieve a chief rank or deputy chief rank or things like that, in their world, they have to have gone through these national kind of command colleges, and they're not easy. They're not this some of the things that we've seen where you go and just have a great time and make a lot of friends, but you don't necessarily bring anything back to the organization, and by way of leading and change and doing that kind of stuff. And so I think there's that. And then when you look at rapid DNA and some of the things that are happening now, I think if we've got things like rapid DNA available today, and really cost is really the only significant kind of hindrance to that, then what are we going to have 10 years from now, 15 years from now in that world? How fast are we going to have information available to us to solve crimes and things like that? So those are the things that I think are really on the forefront, and some of which I think can happen a lot sooner. But I think all of them are going to take serious consideration as we move forward in the profession.
Oh yeah, and you know us as cops, we hate change. Then we don't want things to move forward. We're kind of like
Right.
I like my old pen and pad copy of tickets or reports or whatever. Let's not change too much. But change is inevitable. Change is going to happen. What do you do for you in your department whenever you come across changes where somebody just doesn't want to, and there becomes this conflict?
Yeah.
Somebody just doesn't want to move.
Well, that's true, and you've said it. We hear it all the time, but cops hate change and they hate the way things are, right? And so, it's hard to find that balance. And I think the first part of it, quite frankly, Chris, it starts with developing relationships and trust in the organization long before you're trying to push change. I think you've got to have that first and foremost. A really good friend of mine and colleague and one of my mentors when I was in Norman, that is now a chief in another agency, said, you know we have to trust the people that we lead. We put an inordinate amount of trust in our people to go out and perform at this high level every day. As well as I do in policing. They're operating on an island a lot of the times. They don't have that person right there with them, and nor should they. But for them, they get a choice about whether they trust their leaders or not. So we have to put our trust in them, but they get to choose whether or not they trust us. And so I think the first thing about change is that you got to build that relationship. You got to build that trust. You've got to be transparent in your actions, and you got to be willing, ready, and able to explain why, to make the business case for change. That doesn't always work, but I think at the same time, having that open dialogue, having that presence where people have that psychological safety to come and ask you questions, and then I think the other piece of that is really valuing that diverse perspectives that everybody brings. Being able to do that routinely and to ask people what they think, give them a voice, and listen to those voices. I think is a huge piece of that. And then I think the other piece of that is that when there is that resistance, let's figure out what that root cause is. What is causing that resistance? Is there an underlying fear there of something? Is there and that comes from that dialogue, it comes from that trust, and it comes from that relationship to be able to truly dig down there and really kind of wipe away what some of those maybe fears. A lot of that resistance, I think, comes from that place of fear. And so how do we really address those things? And then I think the other piece of that is that when you're innovative, you're gonna try a lot of things, and not all of them are going to be successful. And you've got to have a comfort level to support the people that came up with the ideas that tried to implement the change when there is failure. You've got to reframe that failure really as an incredible opportunity for our organization to learn and to be better. You can't have an organization that professes to value something like innovation, and then you slap people's hands whenever they fail trying to innovate. And I've seen those types of organizations. And so I think you've got to be able to really address that. Hey, we're going to try these things. They're not always going to be successful, but we're going to continue to learn from that. We're going to become a learning organization. And then I think when it's my idea and it fails miserably, which it does, at times, then I've got to be able to be accountable for that and to stand up and admit mistakes, admit where we should have done something different. And also I think that's important when you think about mid-course changes. I've seen so many times organizations get locked in on this change effort. Maybe the environment changes, but they're still locked in. They're still pressing forward, and they're not accounting for these changes that are occurring in the environment. They're not hearing the voices from the people that are out there, boots on the ground, doing the job, to push the pause button and say, wait a minute, maybe we need to change course right here. And I think all those things kind of combine together really to create this environment where people they accept change, they want to lead change, and or even when they don't like it, they can tolerate it because they know that it's about transparency and it's about relationships and trust.
Yeah, and I like how you put it. It's to create that learning organization because, in all honesty, we're going to screw up over and over again. You don't get this far in your career without making a hell of a lot of mistakes. And the
Yeah.
way I liken it to it is we're just like throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks sometimes, and just to see if it'll work out. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Blue Watch. We had so much to talk about, we actually broke this episode into 2 parts. Join us next week as we continue our conversation on innovation. Until next time, stay safe, everyone.